The day my husband disappeared, the rain didn't stop for a second. It poured like the sky was grieving something it already knew, something I wasn't ready to face yet. I still remember the sound of the thunder that morning, the way it rattled the windows, and how Daniel smiled through it all, pretending everything was fine. "I'll be home by 7, he said, kissing my forehead before heading out the door. "We'll have dinner and maybe watch something stupid on TV." That was the last time I saw him. When 7 came, I started watching the clock. When 8 passed, I began pacing. By 9, I'd texted him twice. Simple messages like, "Everything okay?" and "Where are you?" There was no reply. By midnight, panic had fully taken over. I called his phone over and over, but each time it went straight to voicemail. His voice, once so comforting, now felt haunting in its recorded repetition. "Hey, this is Daniel. Leave a message." By dawn, I had called the police. They told me not to worry, that men sometimes needed space, that maybe he was stressed or having a rough week. But Daniel wasn't like that. He wasn't impulsive or reckless. He was the kind of man who planned everything down to the last detail, even how to fold his shirts in perfect symmetry. The idea of him walking out without a word made no sense. And yet, that's exactly what seemed to have happened. 2 days later, they found his car abandoned near the river. The doors were locked, his wallet was still inside, but the keys were gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no fingerprints except his own. His phone was last traced a mile from his office before the signal vanished completely. That was when the police started treating it as a missing person case instead of a marital misunderstanding. His sister, Clara, flew in from New York almost immediately. I hadn't seen her in months. Clara was a force of nature, sharp, elegant, and intimidatingly composed. Even at the police station, she didn't cry. She didn't ask questions the way I did. She just sat there, silent and cold, until she finally leaned forward and whispered something to one of the detectives. I never found out what she said, but from that moment on, something about her changed. She became distant, almost secretive. Weeks turned into months. Every day I woke up hoping for a call, a clue, a sighting, anything. But nothing came. Friends visited less often. Bills piled up. I sold Daniel's car, then our house, and moved into a small apartment across town. I took a job at a used bookstore because it was quiet there, and I could lose myself in the smell of paper and dust instead of thinking about him. But he was always there. In the songs on the radio, in the places we used to go, in the sudden moments of silence that seemed too heavy to bear. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd wake up convinced I heard the front door open. I'd sit up in bed, holding my breath, and listen for footsteps. Soft, careful steps like his. Once, I swore I heard him whisper my name. "Lena." I rushed into the hallway, heart racing, but of course, there was no one there. Just darkness and the low hum of the refrigerator. Then, one cold October morning, an envelope appeared under my door. There was no name, no return address, just a faint symbol drawn in black ink, a half moon. Inside was a single piece of paper, with one line written in Daniel's handwriting. "Not dead. Don't trust Clara." I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew that handwriting. I had seen it on love notes, grocery lists, and birthday cards. It was his. There was no mistaking it. My hands trembled as I read the words over and over, trying to make sense of them. What did he mean? Not dead. Why would he tell me not to trust his own sister? I rushed to the police with the letter, but they dismissed it. The detective gave me a sympathetic smile and said, "It's probably someone playing a cruel prank. Old grief makes people see things that aren't there." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him and make him believe me. But I didn't. I just walked out, clutching that piece of paper like it was the last part of Daniel I had left. 3 years passed, 3 long, empty years. I stopped talking about him to people. Everyone had their own theories, that he ran away, that he was dead, that maybe I just didn't know who he truly was. I tried to move on, to make peace with the idea that I might never get answers. But deep down, I never stopped hoping. Then one evening, as I was closing the bookstore, I heard the low purr of an engine outside. When I looked up, a sleek black Bentley stopped right in front of me. The tinted window rolled down slowly, and I froze. Clara was behind the wheel, wearing oversized sunglasses and a diamond-studded coat that shimmered under the streetlight. Her expression was unreadable. She didn't greet me or ask how I'd been. She just looked at me and said, "Get in." I stared at her, unsure if I'd heard right. "What?" "Get in," she repeated, her voice calm but commanding. "If you want to know what really happened to Daniel, you need to come with me. Now." I didn't move. My mind spun with questions. Why now? Why after all these years? And what did she mean really happened? "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what this is about," I said. Clara leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Because your husband isn't who you think he is. And if you don't come with me right now, you'll never see him again." The words hit me like a slap. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that she was dangerous. But another voice, the same one that had whispered his name in my dreams, told me to listen. Maybe this was the moment I'd been waiting for. Maybe this was the only chance I'd ever get. So I got in. The Bentley glided through the city streets like a silent shadow. Neither of us spoke for nearly an hour. The city lights faded into the soft blur of countryside, then thick forest. Only the faint hum of the engine and the soft classical music from the radio filled the air. I recognized the song. Daniel used to listen to it when he couldn't sleep. My stomach twisted. Finally, Clara spoke. "Do you know why Daniel married you?" Her question came out of nowhere. I frowned. "Because we loved each other." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "You really think it was that simple?" I turned to look at her. "What are you talking about?" Her fingers tapped rhythmically on the steering wheel. "My brother was involved with people. Dangerous people. He was supposed to stay away from attachments. You were never supposed to be part of his life. But he fell for you, and that changed everything." I shook my head. "That's insane. Daniel was an accountant, not some kind of secret agent." She didn't respond. She just pressed harder on the gas. Trees blurred past in streaks of green and gray. My heart pounded. An hour later, we pulled up to a gated estate in the middle of nowhere. The property was enormous. High metal fences, stone walls, security cameras perched like watchful eyes. The gates opened automatically after Clara pressed her thumb to a scanner hidden near the wheel. I didn't know what was more terrifying, the technology or how casually she used it. Inside, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and steel. Men in black suits moved around silently, nodding to Clara as she passed. No one looked at me directly, but I could feel their eyes following every step. She led me down a long corridor lined with paintings of unfamiliar faces. Men in uniforms, women with jewels, none of them smiling. At the end of the hallway was a heavy oak door. Clara stopped, placing her hand on the doorknob. "Before you see him," she said softly, "you need to understand something. He didn't disappear by accident. He made a deal." My breath caught. "A deal with who?" She met my eyes, and for the first time I saw something almost like pity in her gaze. "With the same people who now want you." She pushed the door open. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single lamp. At first, I thought it was empty. Then I saw the wheelchair. The man sitting in it was thin, pale, and scarred. But his eyes were Daniel's. My heart stopped. "Daniel?" He looked up slowly. "Lena." I stumbled forward, tears blurring my vision, but Clara caught my arm before I reached him. "He can't walk," she said quietly. Not since the explosion. Explosion? I turned to her, confused, terrified. Daniel's hand gripped the armrest of his chair. I told you not to trust her, he said, voice trembling. She's not my sister anymore. She works for them. Clara's lips curled into a faint smile. You still haven't told her the truth, have you? Don't. Daniel warned. Lena, don't listen to anything she says. Oh, she deserves to know, Clara shot back. You owe her that much. She turned to me, her eyes sharp. Your husband wasn't an accountant. He was an undercover agent. I stared at her, unable to breathe. What? Daniel's silence said more than words ever could. Clara continued, her tone almost cruel. He was supposed to disappear forever. But he broke the deal, and now they want both of you gone. He thought he could run, but no one escapes from them. I stepped back, shaking my head. No, this isn't real. This is insane. Neither of them spoke. The silence pressed in around me like a weight. Then, somewhere in the distance, a loud crash shattered the air. Glass breaking, alarms blaring. The lights flickered violently. My wrists were bound with rough cloth. My head ached as though the inside of my skull had been sanded. I tried to sit up and the room swam. The wheelchair beside me held Daniel, motionless, eyes closed. His breath a soft paper rustle in the quiet. The lamp on the small side table hummed and threw a halo of yellow across the room. And somewhere beyond heavy doors, boots moved like distant thunder. Clara was at the doorway, her silhouette edged in light. She looked smaller than she had in the Bentley, not because she'd lost power, but because whatever armor I had imagined around her had been stripped away to reveal exhaustion and something like sorrow. Lena, Daniel said before I could say anything, and his voice was a threadbare thing, frayed and urgent. You're awake. I reached for him, and his fingers tightened around the armrest, a gentle warning. Lena, listen, he whispered, and his breath smelled faintly of antiseptic and burnt coffee. I never wanted you dragged into this. Dragged? I laughed. Not a sound of amusement, but of disbelief that the word could contain the past 3 years. You sent me a note in your handwriting that you were alive, I said, and the memory of that paper scored me like a splinter. You told me not to trust your sister. Daniel's jaw worked. I had to make you leave, he said. It was the only way to keep you safe. Clara moved closer and, for the first time since she'd ordered me into the car, she looked like she might cry. The expression on her face was not triumph. It was the face of someone who'd made choices and then had to live with them. I know what you think, she said. But not trusting me almost made sense once. I didn't have a choice. Choices, I repeated. You brought me here at gunpoint. How is that protection? She closed her eyes and the brittle facade slipped. Because I needed you to know. Because you deserve to know what he did, and who we're really fighting. Then she said the words that split the room open. We're not fighting a criminal gang, Lena. We're up against a private network with reach into places you can't imagine. Judges, companies, governments. They call themselves the Charter. They're not a family. They're a business that deals in secrets and lives. Daniel stumbled into them. He tried to quit. He failed. The name landed like a stone in a still pond and made a wave that took the edges of everything I knew. The Charter, I said, tasting the phrase as if it might be poison. And you? What role did you have? Clara's fingers twisted in the hem of her sleeve. I worked for them once. I managed people. I handled logistics. I thought it would be harmless. Money, power, dull evenings at fancy restaurants. But it's never harmless. Daniel was undercover, deep. He had access to records that could bring people down. He wanted out. That's when they decided he was too valuable to lose. You hid him, I said. You hid him in this place." My voice trembled with the ridiculousness of it all. The idea that the man I had shared a life with had been living in some fortress under the watch of men who moved like shadows. Clara's mouth tightened. "I didn't hide him. I made a bargain." She looked at Daniel then, and something like regret washed over her face. "I promised them I would bring him in. I promised to control him, to keep him quiet, or they would. They would make sure his death looked like an accident. But he tried to run. He broke our terms. They retaliated. The explosion took his legs and his freedom." Daniel's eyes opened, and for a moment, he looked at me with the clarity he once had when he wanted to make a plan. "I thought I could cut the ties," he said. "I thought if I disappeared, if I made them think I was gone, they'd move on. I didn't know they'd come after you." "So you sent me the note," I said, because the pieces were finally clicking into place. The envelope, the half-moon, the single line in his hand. "To save me." "It was the only way I could reach you without them tracing it," he said. "I knew the handwriting would be the key, but I miscalculated. They watched everything. The charter knew when I moved. They were always a step behind." Clara's voice was low. "They use family as currency. If they can't have you, they take who you love. They thought using you as bait would pull him out and make him useful. I couldn't let them have you." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw the fracture lines beneath the polished surface. "So I came to bring you, to force him to tell the truth. I wanted you to hear it from him." Before I could gather my anger into shape, the alarms flared again. A high, keening wail that made the hairs on my neck stand up. Men shouted beyond the door. The muted thud of boots turned sudden into a charge. Someone kicked the outer door open. Light spilled in like an accusation, and a group of men in black tactical gear poured through. Clara's hands flew to a hidden panel at the base of the wall. A section of floor slid open beneath Daniel's wheelchair and dust rose like a small storm. "This way," she said, her voice sharpened by panic and training both. They pushed us toward the opening, as if we were fragile things about to shatter. Daniel's wheelchair was fitted to slot into a motorized platform. Clara barked commands so precisely, it was easy to forget the woman issuing them had been the one to hand me that first ultimatum in a Bentley. We were shoved down into a tunnel that smelled of oil and damp earth, the walls humming with the constant sound of machinery. The platform lurched forward and the world tilted. I clung to Daniel's hand as if the pressure of it could anchor me to the truth. Clara ran ahead, her silhouette already a streak in the dim corridor. "The charters moved faster than we expected," she said over her shoulder. "They have informants inside our perimeter. We don't know how many." Her tone made my stomach seize. "We're going to the old safe house. There are routes there only a few of us know." We emerged into a narrow courtyard, dark except for the strip of cold moonlight. A black SUV waited, engine idling like a sleeping animal. Two men, Clara's trusted men, I gathered, swept us in with efficient motions. The drive out was a silence of strategy. Clara's jaw was set, her eyes distant, as if scanning maps in her head. Daniel breathed in short, precise pulls, as if measured breaths could keep him whole. When at last we stopped, the safe house looked like a house that had been surgically removed from time. Old photographs, a couple of stacks of dusty books, a radio with several taped wires. An elderly woman stood by the kitchen counter with a gaze that swallowed us, and then, without words, handed me a cup of tea. The warmth was human and ordinary, and I drank it like a benediction. For a terrible moment, I let myself believe that we might have a chance. Clara sat opposite me, and only then did she let herself crumble. "They think they own us because they own the paperwork and the judges and the men with power," she said. "But they're not invincible. They're careless when they get greedy." Daniel found something, a ledger, a list of names and transactions. That ledger proves half the charter's empire. He thought if he exposed it, they'd fall. Instead, they tried to erase him. Daniel's fingers, sticky and pale, curled around my hand. I tried to burn it, he whispered. I tried to destroy the evidence, but I didn't get to finish. They took the rest. They made me choose, my silence or your lives. His voice cracked with the memory. I thought if I disappeared, they'd stop looking. I was wrong. So what now? I asked, and the question came out small. Clara's answer was a plan, blunt and desperate. We give them what they want, and then we take back what they stole. We bait the charter into thinking we've surrendered the ledger, but the ledger we give them will be a forgery. Daniel knows where they'll meet. They'll come for the exchange, they always do. If we can get them in one place, and if we have enough proof to show the right eyes, the right people who still care about justice, then we can bring them down. And if we fail? I said. Clara's eyes were steady. Then we die trying. It felt absurdly cinematic and horribly real. The old thrillers Daniel loved always simplified the mechanics of courage. Real courage, I was learning, smelled like disinfectant and tasted like stale tea. But there was something fierce in me that had been dormant while grief built walls around my life. That dormant thing woke with a fierce, hot certainty. I would not let Daniel and Clara stand alone. We set the trap with a series of clumsy and careful moves, each step arranged around Daniel's memory and Clara's contacts. Messages were sent and intercepted, routes scouted, alibis prepared. I learned how to load a gun in a way that made my hands shake, and how to listen for the micro variations in Clara's voice that meant danger. The days blurred into a single, long preparation. Daniel grew weaker and stronger at once, weak in body, stronger in the brittle clarity of his mind. He told me where the ledger had been hidden, in a safety deposit box beneath a shell company he'd once created, the sort of legal sleight of hand the charter used to launder its sins. He said the meeting would be in 3 nights at a private estate on the outskirts of the city, a place of manicured hedges and cameras that watched like vultures. On the night of the exchange, we drove under a sky that had finally stopped its crying. The rain had been and gone, and the air smelled clean and new. It seemed obscene that something so small as weather could change the tone of the world, but it did. We parked at a distance and approached on foot, moving like ghosts beneath a lattice of light.
Clara's plan was twofold. Daniel would act as if he were surrendering, handing over a forged ledger. The charter would expose their operatives in celebration, and we would use the chaos to get the real evidence out into the public's hands. The estate was all heights and stone and arrogance. Men in dark suits waited beneath lanterns like a line of black chess pieces. I recognized faces I'd seen in photos, smiling at charity events, hands shaking the hands of men who would never know how much those smiles cost. The exchange began with a small, perfunctory handshake, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, like a wound opening, it all detonated. Gunfire cracked like thunder. Clara moved with the speed of someone who had rehearsed betrayal 100 times. Men fell and alarmed voices cried out. Daniel, wheeling forward, looked like a corpse wearing a mask of movement. His eyes met mine, and there was a fierce, questioning tenderness there. In the chaos that followed, we found the safe deposit box, and with shaking fingers, retrieved the ledger from its false binding. The paper folded beneath my hands had the cold, inevitable print of truth. Names, transactions, shell companies, all the small bookkeeping that made monsters wealthy and invisible. We were not graceful as we escaped. Bullet holes punctured doors, and a man I had thought invincible fell like a severed marionette. Clara dragged Daniel toward the waiting SUV while I ran, the ledger clutched to my chest. We were nearly there when a figure stepped into the path. A man in a tailored suit with the absence of emotion that comes from having pulled enough strings to choke a nation. He smiled, and his smile was a blade. "You thought you could burn us," he said, as if chastising a wayward child. "You thought you could use family as bait." His hand rose and the world rewound to that first moment in the Bentley when his presence would have made sense. He raised his gun. Everything slowed, then fractured. A shot rang out from the left, and the man crumpled like an undone coat. Clara collapsed to the pavement, a red stain spreading beneath her. She looked up at me with a softness that did more than any speech to explain the parable of her life. "Go," she mouthed, and her fingers, so elegant and cruel, tightened around my hand. "Take them down." Her eyes closed, and for a beat, the rain began again, soft at first, then harder, and the world suddenly smelled of wet earth, like forgiveness. We made it out. The ledger went to journalists who still had courage enough to publish. The Charter, exposed, found that their papers could not hide the smell of rot that had become public. Men were arrested. Names that had once been whispered became charges in court. It did not end everything. The Charter had roots that would take years to excavate, but the ledger was a line drawn in the sand. It meant people who had been protected for decades would feel the heat of daylight for the first time. Clara was gone before the first arrests were made. The news called her a tragic casualty of a criminal organization. To me, she would always be more complicated than that. In the weeks after, I sat at Daniel's bedside and watched him grow stronger in small, stubborn increments. He learned to use his shoulders to propel the wheelchair. He relearned how to make coffee with one hand. He found joy in small, domestic tasks, as if each one were a reclaiming. We did not have a neat ending. The Charter's tendrils reached into places that took years to prune. Some names were never made public. Some men in suits walked away to live under new identities. But the ledger was out, and in that strange, ragged way that life sometimes stitches wounds, we began to live again. Daniel and I rebuilt around different foundations. Our love, if it remained, had been reshaped by the fire. We argued, we laughed, we mourned Clara with a tenderness that was more honest than any obituary. On a wet morning months later, I stood at the river where the car had been found, watching water move over stones like a slow exhale. Rain fell soft and steady, and I thought of the very first line that had brought me back to this place, the sky mourning something it already knew. I placed my hand on the cold railing and felt, beneath my fingers, the small pulse of the world that continued, regardless of deals or betrayals. Daniel wheeled up beside me, and for a long time we just breathed together. Two silhouettes against the gray, both scarred, both stubbornly insisting on forward. "I'm sorry," he said, as if apology could stitch what had been torn. His voice was steady and real and fragile all at once. I looked at him and saw the man who had kissed my forehead the morning the rain had begun. I saw the man who had disappeared and returned, with a ledger tucked like contraband in a pocket. I saw a man who had once believed he could fight alone and realized he was wrong.
"We survived," I said instead of forgiveness, because survival was the only honest record we had. He smiled, and the smile was small and honest and enough. The rain kept falling, steady as a metronome. It was not the same rain as before. It did not feel like mourning. It felt like something the world did to wash itself clean. And in that quiet, ordinary ceremony, I understood that we had been changed, but not ended. The Charter had been exposed. Clara's choices had been laid cold and terrible in the open. And Daniel and I, scarred, careful, had been given a sliver of a life we could try to rebuild. I thought of the envelope with the half moon and the single line of his handwriting and felt, oddly, gratitude for the terrible honesty of it. If not for that flimsy paper, who knows where our lives would have ended? We had been forced into the center of something vast and corrupt and had come out with blood on our hands and truth in our pockets. It was not a story with a clean moral or a promise that everything would be fixed. It was a story about how love can be a reckless thing, how loyalty can be a lie and a saving grace, and how sometimes the only way to stop monsters is to shine a light so bright it burns. When we left the river that day, the rain trailed off and the sun put on a thin, tentative face between the clouds. Daniel reached for my hand and I let him, because after everything, we had the small bravery of existing together. We moved forward slowly, each step a careful promise. The ledger had done what it could. The rest would take time. But the sky was no longer simply morning. It was clearing. And in the clearing, I could at least see the road ahead.